Dr. Cavalli, you provide sustainable fashion SMEs with expert advice on law and sustainability through the NGO REN Collective. I'm also introducing to you Miss Sara Cavagnero, who is a qualified lawyer on intellectual property and researcher at the Northumbria University, where she focuses on the use of IP assets as private sustainability governance tools. Ms. Cavagnero acts as an expert to the UN CFAC project on the traceability and transparency of sustainable value chains in garments and footwear. She also co-founded the NGO REN Collective, where she acts as a law and sustainability specialist for sustainable fashion SMEs. Dr. Heidi Harkonnen is a senior researcher at the University of Turku. Prior to becoming a lawyer, Dr. Harkonnen studied fashion design. So working in fashion law now for a decade, she has been a pioneer in developing this research area in Finland and founded the Finnish Fashion Law Association. Your PhD, Heidi, focused on the copyright protection as a tool to foster the sustainable development of the fashion industry. So, Dr. Cavalli, Ms. Cavagnero, Dr. Harkonnen, the floor is now yours for your intervention.
So, once again, thank you, Ms. Maire, for the introduction, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation. It is really a pleasure to be here and be able to present our research in this unique context and to a diversified audience in terms of background and expertise. Our research takes the premises from the EU Strategy for Sustainable and Circular Textiles, which, as it has been already mentioned, it was released earlier this year in March by the European Commission, together with other regulatory measures, always addressed to the transition toward a circular economy. We were very happy to see the release of this strategy because, as Emmannuelle Maire said, textiles is a very significant industrial sector in the EU in terms of revenues and in terms of employment. But sadly, it has also, the textile sector is also well known for the unsustainable practices that are present along the entire life cycle of the entire production process, from the acquisition of raw materials until the end of life of products, such as, for instance, waste management and unsold goods. And when reading the strategy, we particularly focused on the second point of the strategy, which addresses the destruction of unsold or returned textiles. And we noticed immediately that the strategy does not mention IP law. And hence, we decided that perhaps our research would have given and would have been useful in terms of providing an insight on the relation between IP law and the IP protection in the context of this strategy, because the protection of IP rights may weaken or may not, depending on how this strategy will unfold, may weaken the objectives that are tackled and that this strategy aims to achieve. So we decided to, so the research is divided into three parts. The first part provides a contextualization of the production of textiles and precisely on global value chains and how contracts are relevant in the organization of the production. Then Sara will present her part on the reasons behind the destruction of unsold and returned textiles. So she will provide both the political and economic reasons behind this practice, which is very detrimental to the environment. And then Heidi will address more specifically how IP law may be in conflict with the objectives related to a circular economy and how these relate to upcycling and other fragments of the life cycle of a product. So with no further ado, I will present my part, which aims to provide just the contextualization, as I was saying. So the strategy takes global value chains into account when it comes to ensuring human rights and environmental due diligence along the chain, which was also previously mentioned by Dr. Rohleder. And this probably will provide the leeway to link the strategy to the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which is under discussion. And then the second part that where global value chains are mentioned is the management of textile waste, where the Commission will probably revision the rules on the shipment of waste. But the problem of unsold goods is not really tackled in this framework. And just a little overview for the non-lawyers in the audience. So global value chains can be considered the way in which production systems are organized, both in the textile industries, but also in other industries. But the textile industry is one of the main important sectors that works with this type of system. And contracts are typically understood as being the operational tool. What does this mean? That a brand will enter contracts with the suppliers and order that will change, the contract will change in accordance with the fragment of the process of production, but then usually the production process is based on these contracts where the brand the brand enters with suppliers and suppliers with sub-suppliers and so on and so forth. However, through this contract, the brand can also ensure the respect of the sustainability requirements, but especially the protection of IP rights. So these contracts provide also a layer of enforcement through which brands can ensure the protection of their brand. These may have different consequences in sustainability terms. And for instance, I wanted to provide an example because through this contractualization of processes of production, we also have an over-fragmentation. And the over-fragmentation provides the brands with the means to tailor the costs that they will bear in the production system in every step of the life cycle of a product. And when it comes to waste management and destruction of goods, brands can also externalize the responsibility of taking care of unsold goods or waste management by entering a contract for repairing. And hence, they will not be considered the producer of the waste. This has the consequence of transferring the responsibility of the obligations deriving from the extended producer responsibility, not on the brands which want to protect its brand, but on the contractor that will perhaps try to repair the goods. But if they are found not to be repairable, it will have to manage them as waste. So in this way, you see that contract can be used by brands to protect their IP rights while still externalizing the costs deriving from this protection. And now I will leave the floor to Sara Cavagnero, who will present in more detail the reasons behind the destruction of unsold or returned goods.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thanks, Emmannuelle, for the introduction. It's a pleasure for me as well to be here today and address the issues related to brand protection behind unsold and returned items. When it comes to the destruction of such goods, the first question which comes to one's mind is, why do fashion brands dispose of their products rather than resorting to more eco-friendly and potentially even more profitable solutions such as resale, donation, and so on. It would seem indeed counterintuitive to send new and unused products to waste, provided that the company invested resources in the production process. Think, for example, of raw materials, packaging, transportation, and so on. To answer to this question, one must ask itself how much value brands truly place on their items. Beyond the financial advantages related to producing larger quantities of goods, and beyond the fact that the retail price of apparel products does not necessarily correspond to the expenditure behind it. So, for example, destroying a 900 euros dress does not technically mean for the company losing 900 euros. There is another and less explored issue that comes into place and relates to the preservation of IP assets, and in particular of the brand's goodwill embedded in trademarks. Trademarks indeed are often considered one of the most valuable resources for fashion companies, and they're even more valuable than the products themselves. So brand protection stands in the middle between the practice of disposing of unsold or returned products and the strong willingness of a fashion company to be in control of the goods, even to the extent that destroying them seems like a better option than losing oversight of them. So to better understand why brands fear losing control of their intangible IP resources, it is first necessary to appraise the economic implications of trademark protection. Trademarks have been framed as strategic resources under the resource-based view. What are strategic resources? They're basically valuable, rare, and difficult to imitate or substitute resources. They're important because they are potential sources of competitive advantages. Creating, developing, and protecting trademarks as strategic resources requires a process of value and meaning creation, which unfolds in the notion of brands. Branding strategies are indeed able to provide consumers with identity and belonging. They create new cultural and social meanings that go beyond a good's physical attributes. Building trademark goodwill through branding strategies can be a multi-million euros investment. In these cases, trademark protection is perceived as a lever for success that influences the product's demand and the price. Speaking of demand and price, and taking the luxury segment as a more straightforward reference, three economic theories come into play. First of all, the Veblen effect, according to which an increase in the price of a product may also boost the demand for such an item, and vice versa. The Snob effect, where price is also perceived as an indicator of exclusivity, and finally the bandwagon effect, where the consumption of prestige products is used to convey membership to a particular group. Against this economic background, it becomes clearer that fears over brand protection have driven the decision over the avoidance of off-price sales, which could come at the expense of brand goodwill. As an interconnected legal issue, we must also take into consideration the EU competition law that prohibits the so-called resale price maintenance. This means that a fashion company cannot limit the ability, for instance, of an outlet retailer to determine its own retail price, which could also be lower than the acceptable minimum that the fashion brand set in order to preserve its goodwill, so the exclusivity and scarcity models. So off-price sales channels have been seen as potentially detrimental to a brand's reputation, and this has driven the company's decision to opt for destruction rather than resale. A further driving force behind the disposal of unsold and returned fashion products is to avoid the goods being sold on grey markets. Gray products are goods manufactured under the authorization of the trademark owner, legally purchased in one country and then imported in another country by a person other than the trademark owner and without the latter's permission. This phenomenon is known as parallel importing. And in such circumstances, the exhaustion or first sale doctrine applies under European Union law. This entails that once a product has been sold in the EU with the manufacturer's consent, so either directly or through a distributor, the manufacturer itself can no longer oppose to the movement of the product within the EU borders, cannot oppose to the shipment of the product from one country to another, and cannot prevent an unselected distributor that has succeeded in procuring a product legally from further selling such item. The first sale doctrine thus clashes with the company's need to preserve the trademark goodwill and the brand equity, as it enables unknown distributors to unconditionally sell the items, making it difficult to defend the quality of the goods and the brand image. The European case law elaborated and further integrated the legitimate reasons which would prevent the applicability of the principle of exhaustion and, of course, of the first sale doctrine. But these legitimate reasons still remain limited. In a very recent judgment of October 2022, the European Court of Justice recognized among the exception two very extreme cases. First, the sales of a product in a way that damaged the brand's image or reputation. Second, where the cases in which transactions give the impression that there is an economic link between the unauthorized distributor and the trademark owner. These exceptions are limited, as I mentioned. So this explains, again, why trademark holders resort to product disposal rather than having their goodwill and brand equity hindered, and rather than starting very long and resource-consuming cases. There's a problem. Disposal could easily turn into a double-edged sword when it comes to trademark dilution. Consumers may question how much the company really cares about sourcing the most precious raw materials and artisanship if eventually some of it will end up in an incinerator. Further, as consumers become more aware about the environmental implications of product disposal, the brand's reputation will be at stake. As I highlighted earlier, trademarks are the hub around which fashion companies' operations and strategies revolve, and also a tool to express goals, values, and positions. It then becomes crucial that the identity and integrity embedded in the mark does not clash with the actual practices carried out by the brand. The conception of trademarks as strategic resources is, in my opinion, to be reconciled with the natural resource-based view, which requires to go beyond a purely economic perspective, which motivates brands' decision to dispose of their products at the moment. And there's a need to stress that pollution prevention, product stewardship, and sustainable development could also improve the efficiency and competitiveness of a company, thus boosting the brand's goodwill. The forthcoming legislation needs to tackle this issue and needs to address these points in order to be effective and in order to effectively deal with the issue of the destruction. I will now leave the floor to my colleague Heidi, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sara and Rebecca. We are now going to move to the reasons why intellectual property rights so often conflict with circularity in fashion. Now that the strategy aims at discouraging the destroying of unsold or returned fashion goods, it is important to look for alternative circular ways to use unsold and returned textiles. This includes fostering and enabling upcycling practices and businesses. However, as an embodiment of larger brand protection objectives, IP rights may be used by a rights holder as an obstacle for upcycling and therefore hinder the sustainable use of products that are otherwise destined to be destroyed. This is possible because the IPR regime does not appear to fully recognize sustainability. There are at least two reasons for the conflict between IPR and sustainability. Firstly, European countries have traditionally followed the strong property rights approach, which has been reflected in many of the current structures of the European IPR framework, and thus hindered the sustainability perspective to be genuinely taken seriously. Secondly, the principle of proportionality appears to have only opened the door for weighing and balancing between the exclusive rights and, for instance, general arguments on free competition and efficient markets, but not sustainability. Overall, the current IPR regime promotes a model where access to goods is not based on a circular economy, but on linear models of consumption and ownership. Practices and principles that are essential for the circular economy, such as reuse and recycling, might thus conflict with intellectual property rights. To give an example, I'm going to talk to you about the doctrine of exhaustion in the context of upcycling and copyright. Some upcycling of copyright-protected fashion goods could be allowed due to the principle of exhaustion. This principle limits the extent to which a rights holder can enforce their distribution right to a copy of a work. Although the principle of exhaustion could in theory open a door for various commercial upcycling practices, in practice this is difficult as IP rights are often interpreted widely and commercial activities targeted at reusing, repairing, and recycling of protected products are easily considered as infringements. According to the WIPO Copyright Treaty and the InfoSoc Directive, the principle of exhaustion applies to a product that was put on the market by the right holder or with their consent. This is where upcycling the principle of exhaustion does not apply to copies that remain in stock. The upcycler would therefore need to somehow lawfully acquire the ownership of the dead stock. This, of course, can be easier said than done, especially when considering the reasons that many companies have for maintaining control and destroying dead stock, as Sara just explained. Being afraid that their products would somehow be devalued, brands might not want their products to end up in so-called wrong hands. This is related to the snob effect. Of course, whether upcycling de facto really devalues any brand is highly arguable. But whether brands like it or not, they now must re-evaluate their policies concerning what constitutes as devaluing of their brand. Now that the strategy wants to discourage from destroying unsold garments, brands must find alternative ways to get rid of their dead stock. As sustainability is increasingly valued among consumers, fashion businesses are beginning to understand the benefits of highlighting a circular approach. Selling or donating dead stock to upcycling practitioners is a good alternative, and this would also allow us to overcome the obstacle of first sale requirement. But what do we do if the right holder is reluctant to transfer the ownership of dead stock. Are there any possibilities for upcycling in those cases? Under the current legislative framework, it could be difficult to force brands to relinquish their property against their will. This is especially true if we look at the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, Article 17, Right to Property, which states that everyone has the right to own, use, dispose of, and bequeath their lawfully acquired possessions. But the right to property is not absolute, as the article continues that no one may be deprived of their possessions except in the public interest and in the cases and under the conditions provided for by law, subject to fair compensation, being paid in good time for their loss. The use of property may be regulated by law insofar as it is necessary for the general interest. The latter part allows us to consider that under certain circumstances, fashion brands could be obliged to surrender their dead stock for the purposes of reuse, repair, or recycling. This obligation could be supported by Article 37 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, according to which a high level of environmental protection and the improvement of the quality of the environment must be integrated into the policies of the Union and ensured in accordance with the principle of sustainable development. On this basis, we could argue that improving the quality of the environment must be integrated into the Union's IPR policies and ensured in accordance with the principle of sustainable development. This might require obliging fashion brands to surrender their dead stock, which they would otherwise destroy. But it might be realistic to presume that limiting companies' control over their property perhaps would not attract enough political support, at least not in the current environment, where even the IP system values strong property rights more than anything else. Moreover, it is likely that garment producers would heavily lobby against such reformation. So the question still remains how to interpret the IP regime in a sustainable manner. In the current legal environment, and especially considering the interpretation of the principle of exhaustion, utilizing unsold and returned fashion goods for commercial upcycling appears to be complex and this reflects the underlying values of the IP system. Strong property rights outweigh interests related to sustainability. To prevent IP law from hindering the EU textile strategies aimed to decrease the destruction of fashion dead stock, one important thing to do is to interpret the principle of exhaustion in a manner that is upcycling friendly. This could be done by giving more weight to the Charter of Fundamental Rights, Article 37, and which is environmental protection, and also remembering that the right to property is not absolute. You can't do just anything with your property if there's public interest that's big enough. It can be argued that in an event where usable or reusable textiles are about to face destruction, there is a public interest that is big enough to permit diverging from the right to property. Also, we must remember that overprotection of IP has potential in chilling innovation. On the contrary, a legal environment that is friendly towards upcycling activities has great potential in encouraging innovations and new businesses that utilize textile waste and other items considered as trash by the mainstream fashion industry. This could be one of those green transitions that the European Commission aims to achieve with this strategy. Now, to say a few concluding remarks about our research. As sustainability is increasingly valued among consumers, fashion brands are businesses are beginning to understand the benefits of highlighting a circular approach. So instead of far-reaching attempts to maintain control over dead stock, selling or donating it to upcycling practitioners should be seen as a viable option. It can also accumulate goodwill to the company. In the best scenario, upcycling benefits both the brand with dead stock as well as the upcycler. But of course, one must not think that a boom in novel fashion business models such as upcycling would mean absolute sustainability. If such businesses essentially vest on overproduction of other brands, they are a band-aid solution to a fatal problem. But of course, this kind of green circular business models are certainly better than the old linear ways of doing fashion business. Our research demonstrates how one of the aims of the strategy has complex links to IP legislation and fashion's global value chains. We have seen that the contractual structure of a global value chain is not merely an operational tool, but is an instrument to enforce contractual and market power. For the strategy to work properly, attention should be paid to the aforementioned issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, Sara, Heidi. We've been privileged to listen to you. I think that clearly your research is going in the right direction, acting in the sense of the European general interest. And you are spot on two critical issues that we have highlighted in the textile strategy, which is the destruction of unsold goods, and also the need to have new business models and focusing in particular on upcycling. I think that the fact that this event is also recorded would be of benefit to many colleagues working across Europe to find solutions, because the Council and the European Parliament will be discussing the question of destruction of unsold goods and having to make decisions in that respect, and also, pushing towards the incentivization of business models. So I think that your research is giving a great explanation on the root causes leading to that situation. It will be extremely helpful. Before turning to the discussion on this matter, I will now open the floor for the debate, and I wanted to first of all address a few questions to Dr. Rohleder. Thank you so much for staying with us and for your availability. It's really immensely appreciated. Dr. Rohleder, why do you think that a policy framework is needed to boost sustainability in the textile sector? What is the role of politics and policies in that respect?
Thank you very much. I think it is very clear that only voluntary measures have not been enough, because we have the situation that we have now. So, and we had a lot of progress in the sustainable fashion market in the last years, but it's still a niche market. It's very small. That we have in Germany, we have only about 3% of really sustainable clothes that have very trustful certification scheme, like the Green Button or the Blue Angel, which are very well known and have really high standard. So, and for consumers, it means it's still very, very difficult really to buy sustainable clothes where I can be sure it's really produced in a sustainable way, human rights standards are held, and that it's also on with a high level on environmental standards produced. So when I'm in a shop and I have 3 pairs of jeans, for example, that are sustainable, but none of them fits, or I just don't like them. So it's a really huge temptation to take the one of the 100 others that are in the same shop. So, and that's why we need really binding standards. So when I want to buy some clothes, I have only sustainable choices to make. So that's why I appreciate the textile strategy very much. And I think there's another point where it's very important to have some regulation, that's greenwashing. And there also the European Commission put a proposal on the table. It's empowering consumers for the green transition. And there it's the goal to make greenwashing more difficult. And that's also something what I think is very, very important, because often I try to find out about a brand, what their sustainability policy, but it's really not possible really to know if it's really sustainable or if they just say, oh, it's climate neutral, but I can't see what they are doing to make it climate neutral. And that's something that I think is also very, very important. And I think we have very good experiences with the eco-design directive, and we have very good experience with the A to G labeling that we have for electric products. So I think to get this kind of scheme also for textiles would be very, very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's about making sustainable products the norm and not the exception. So it's really mandatory instead of voluntary. Thank you so much. I wanted also to ask you how stakeholders in Germany have received the strategy. Do you see a lot of opposition, a lot of support? Do you think that it is important to activate more people in favor? Sometimes it's difficult to assess, in different corners of Europe how things are developing. So I would be really interested in knowing what is your take in Germany.
I think at the moment it's very difficult to say. We do not yet have at the moment brands or manufacturers, they don't say us that they are afraid of this strategy. Nobody wants to say we don't want to produce sustainable. So that's at the moment it's rather quiet, and nobody says, oh, we are producing fast fashion. I think there your sentence with fast fashion is out of fashion is a quite good claim. So, but I think we will it will get quite difficult when we have the details lying on the table, because then brands can see which things they will have to change when it comes into force. So at the moment, it's rather quiet, but I think there will be very difficult discussions when we have the details of the proposal.
Thank you so much. It reminds me when we discussed, the plastic strategy, the circular plastic strategy. There was, I think, broad agreement on it. And then when we entered the debate on the single-use plastics directive, and we started saying, you need to attach the cap to the bottle, and then we had massive lobbying because of some industries not willing to do changes to the production line. So indeed, this is really what I see very often on circular economy, that on the main principles there is agreement or no strong opposition, but the issue is very often on the very practical manner when the law is designed in the European Parliament and in the Council. So it's also very important to bring more people on board and to speak about the strategy so that we have a broad mobilization. Another question, Dr. Rohleder, is what is the German government doing regarding the sustainability of the sector? You spoke, for example, about the work that you're doing on certain pieces of textiles. What type of criteria should be applied to certain pieces of clothes? Can you tell us more about what is ongoing in Germany there?
Yes, we have two certification schemes in Germany that where the German government was involved in the development of these certification schemes, and this is one is the Blue Angel. This exists for textiles, but also for paper, for a lot of different things. There we had basic research carried out by the German Environment Agency in 2013, and this the results are also publicly available, and so it is really transparent which are the criteria of the Blue Angel in the different areas. And we have the green button. This was developed after the Rana Plaza disaster in Bangladesh 2013. After this, we had a multi-stakeholder partnership on sustainable textiles in Germany, and this resulted in this certification scheme with the green button that you also can see at a lot of textiles now, but I said it's only a niche, still only a niche market. And I think it's also very important to have a look to the human rights. And there I think it's important the the directive on corporate due diligence, and that's also something we support because we think that's also very important. And so and now I already mentioned the two workshops we are doing, and we are supporting the textile strategy. So I think these are the most important things, and we are working on a right to repair, but that's also not only on textiles, it's broader. We want to have this in general all over all the physical products in the eco-design guideline.
Thank you so much for this, and for colleagues who are working on Germany on this. I'm sure this will be really beneficial, because with the textiles criteria which have been developed for the Blue Angel, like for the Nordic Swan or the EU Eco-Label, we have a valuable experience. I mean, those criteria were designed for the best-in-class products in the market, but they can really serve as an inspiration to now draft, the criteria for binding requirements that would be set in the eco-design directive or regulation. And this would mean that indeed you would not be able to place on the market textiles which would not be sustainable, and that you could have labeling information to consumers or digital product passport that could become available. There is a lot of work to be done in this field, and we need to get all the experience we have, and the product criteria from the Blue Angel will be very important there. Thank you very much, Dr. Rohleder. I'm now turning to Rebecca. As I was saying, the debate on the destruction of unsold goods will probably be in the coming months one of the key issue, especially for the European Parliament as well, because the first discussions that took place on the textile strategy really show a big interest from the members of the European Parliament. Also because it's understood by citizens. We see many examples across Europe, and this is shocking for citizens to see that new goods are sent to incineration. So it's a very political issue, I think. If you were to explain how to use the results of your research to a member of the European Parliament, what would you tell her? What would you tell him? How would you distill the main takeaway of your study for a non-expert?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because as also Sara was mentioning, there is a personal link to fashion, and I think that when it comes to anything that is related to the fashion industry, everybody is really touched in a way on a personal level, and seeing how this can be detrimental to people and the environment puts people in a very difficult position, because on the one hand, we don't really have the means to address the issue directly, but we have to expect other people to take action in this sense. So I think that for non-expert, trying to probably engage with the different stakeholders can be a relevant solution. So our main takeaway of our research is to tackle several issues that are very technical, but also I think that the creation of knowledge in the field of fashion and sustainability comes with the engaging with different stakeholders, from NGOs to academia, to provide a kind of holistic perspective. So it's not enough a ban, as we were saying, but then you have to see what are the reasons and what are the consequences, and how you can engage with different stakeholders that have different perspectives. So one main thing would be really to have a holistic perspective on the fashion industry, and specifically on the destruction of unsold goods.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Turning to Sara, how do you think a policy framework could support a better application of brand protection, enabling new business models to give another life to unsold goods?
Thank you, Emmannuelle. So my answer very much relates to what Rebecca just mentioned. So in my view, to draft sound and effective legal rules, it is mandatory to take an informed and holistic perspective, because when it comes to sustainability in the fashion sector, we are facing the so-called wicked problem. So we need to be aware of the fact that seemingly separate and not really connected issues are actually interdependent. So when it comes to brand protection, it shall be managed in harmony with new circular and sustainable business models. And the challenges that brands face need to be taken into account in order to strike a balance between the company's private interest and the public interest, which grounds sustainability concerns. So there are solutions which are already available, which are also put into practice in the market. For instance, strategies to counter counterfeiting, such as tracking and tracing technologies based on blockchain or on NFTs that could serve environmental or social purposes as well. For instance, right, by bringing under the spotlight different tiers of the supply chain. In my view, the policy framework should also take into account the authentication challenges that are faced in the resale market, where trademark owners typically lose control of the transactions and fear trademark dilution. So there are solutions which are already available, as I said, such as partnerships with trusted resellers, the development of proprietary resale platforms, or other tools to allow brands to participate in the product authentication process and thus lower the risks. And finally, as we were speaking of sustainability metrics, in my view, the Commission could also take into account the inclusion of the brand's commitment to avoid wasteful disposal of unsold products, but at the same time also impose obligations on information disclosure. So there's a huge problem. The elephant in the room is the lack of reliable sources regarding the amount of dead stock that exists. So if we don't have such an information, it will become problematic to effectively regulate the market.
I take your point, and that was also one issue on which we stumbled in the analysis in the context of the design of the sustainable product draft regulation. So this is why your research is really valuable. So there is a need for more information before the decision of the 27 member states in the Council and the European Parliament. But maybe also on the same issue, Heidi, how do you think that policy makers could make good use of your findings at European Union level?
Well, in addition to what Rebecca and Sara just said, I think that the policymakers, they must realize that IP legislation should not be as right holder centric as it is now. Instead, IP policies, in IP policies, we must pay attention to a fair balance. Instead of merely focusing on the property aspects of intangible assets, we also must consider situations where the public interest to access and use IP protected goods is large enough to diverge from this strong property rights approach. And now when I talk about access and access to fashion, I don't mean this typically associated with access to fashion, because typically when we talk about access to fashion, we mean cheap garments that everyone can afford. But, well, new garments that are being produced, they should not be cheap. I think we all agree on that. But what I mean by access is that it should be easier for individuals and also commercial operators to utilize IP-protected goods in a way that fosters the circular economy, and right holders should not be able to prevent, for instance, upcycling of their products, because honestly, that would be monopolizing trash. So policymakers must keep in mind that ideally a product, a fashion good or something else, can have multiple lives or careers after its first intended use. And this kind of circularity must be enabled by law, also by IP law, which at the moment is a good tool to prevent such circular use. So we kind of need opposite mindset in IP policies that what we are accustomed to, and sort of outside of box thinking. Intellectual property law, it's very focused on the word property, and that you're able to do basically anything with your property. Even the Charter of Fundamental Rights says that everyone has the right to dispose of their lawfully acquired possessions. But in fashion, I say that if you want to dispose of your possessions, your products, then how about not manufacturing it in the first place? Because it exists for nothing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm recalling participants to our session that they can take the floor by asking questions and getting an answer from us. So please do not hesitate to do this. For now, I don't see questions coming through the box, but maybe we will get some more participation. From what we have seen also at European Union level, there is in the question of the destruction of unsold goods issues related to the difficulties in certain countries to also donate, but not necessarily in relation to brand protection, but rather in relation to taxation matters. So I think that what is behind or the drivers of this situation are related to different causes, but the one that you are highlighting today is really valuable. Maybe one question to you all. Have you seen already initiatives from CEOs of large fashion industries teaming up to discuss this matter of brand protection in impeding a more circular textile model? Are you aware if the Sherpas of the CEOs have identified this? Do you think it would be good to promote that type of discussion with some large companies, also to make the examples which exist in the industry available to many? Because sometimes when the issues are technical and intellectual property rights is complex, then sometimes it does not go up in the debate also at top industry level. Yes, Dr. Rohleder.
Yeah, I think there are some initiatives, for example, to offer the possibility to get your things repaired. The things you bought in that shop, it's from the same brand, so you can bring it to the same brand to get it repaired. So this is something I can see at some brands, but it's really at the beginning. And we have some platforms selling clothes that also offer to send back things, and they start a second-hand market on their platform too. So that's something I think is very valuable, because then you have, when you like shopping at a certain platform because you find the things you like there, it's your style, and then you find the same style in the second-hand shop there. So this really can boost kind of circularity.
Yeah, if I may, another initiative that already exists is the partnership with popular and trusted second-hand reseller. So, for instance, the Real is a famous stakeholder in the second-hand market that is widely used by luxury brands such as Gucci, Burberry, Stella McCartney, and is so trusted because it allows the brand to enter into the authentication process. So the brand has a say when it comes to the resale of its own products. And to add on what Dr. Rohleder mentioned, there is an issue that comes with the reparation and resale programs. So companies are investing a lot of money on their own proprietary systems. So it is something that does exist, but it's sort of a niche. It excludes smaller entities and smaller companies from the game. And also going back to what Emmannuelle asked before, so what is the perception of companies when it comes to the strategy? I work with SMEs mainly, and the feeling is that of fear. So when they read the strategy and they see the upcoming legislation, their feeling is, what are we going to do? We have like 15 new regulations, directives, which we are expecting, and they require us to make investments and change dramatically our perspective. So even when it comes to the use of unsold stock, I think there is a need to take smaller entities into the broader framework in order to, first of all, take into account that the majority of fashion companies operating in Europe has small or medium dimensions, and taking into account as well that the solutions that are in place in the market require huge investments that smaller entities not necessarily can bear.
Very good. I don't know, Rebecca, if you have any other remarks or no. Good.
I rely on Sarah's knowledge on this. On this point.
Yeah. So I see one question from an anonymous attendee. So I'm reading it to you. How is research on an A to E label for the textile industry progressing? What are the challenges involved? And what will the same textile criteria, durability, repairability, etc., be used for this? So I don't know if any participant wants to comment on this. Otherwise, I'm also happy to come in.
Maybe you know the best what's happening there now.
Yeah, so
I have on this question, because Dr. Rohleder also mentioned it, and I was curious, just as a follow-up question, to know if in Germany you are considering also a similar proposal. Thank you.
Shall I answer? Or, yes, we will do 2 workshops and on jeans and t-shirts, where we also will involve stakeholders, and there we want to simulate how such a scheme from A to G could look like, but that's the beginning. I think we must look deeper into this with some research, really to before really fixing these criteria.
Mm-hmm. I will also complement on this. So with the new proposal for an eco-design regulation, we are asking the 27 member states and the European Parliament to give the European Union the possibility to legislate on the sustainability on textiles. So we need this political agreement before anything can be, adopted regarding the label. So this is very important to understand, because as Dr. Rohleder said, the Eco-Design Directive, it's made for energy-related products only. It's made for energy efficiency. And, until we have the decision made by the European Parliament and the Council that we can expand it and we can cover textiles, but also priority products, and it will not be possible to have anything in law. So there is a political process, and this is a very important process. At the same time, we don't want to wait for the agreement to start the work. So the work has started, and at the European Commission we have a joint research center who is used to develop product criteria. So they have been working on the EU Ecolabel criteria, so same as for the Blue Angel. And so we are basically tasking our scientific body to launch that process. And it's not a process done only within the European Commission, but it's always a process which will require the input from everybody. So this is very, very important, and especially on the criteria which will be used. I think the question was also raised, what kind of criteria are we going to take? Is it durability, repairability, environmental footprint, recycle content? So these issues are really important in that context. And there is time for debate. There is no pre-cooked plan. At the same time, I would like to draw the participants' attention to the fact that the industry has teamed up as well, the full textile industry, to work on the precise calculation of the environmental impact of its product. So it can be, a T-shirt as well, or it can be shoes. And by teaming up and by using the environmental footprint methods, they are trying to assess what is the key criteria to take into account for textile, what is the benchmark for the average product, and how one specific piece of textile from a producer compared to the benchmark. So there is the comparability that can be done on the basis of these specific rules. But that would be on the environment, looking at the ultimate environmental impact on 16 environmental categories. So that could also, bring interesting findings in the context of designing the specific rules there. So I think there is expertise, and what is going on in Germany also will help us. And I think that the textile strategy is also helping us to mobilize research and stakeholders for the design of the criteria.
Emmannuelle, there are some questions in the chat.
Very good. So there is one which I would like to ask the participant, which is a very good one, I think also. What is the European perspective on the ethical problem of cultural appropriation in fashion?
I have researched cultural appropriation and IP law a little bit, so I can maybe say a few words. I'd say it's frowned upon. There's no standard IP law opinion on cultural appropriation because it's a very complex issue. But I try to be brief. So I think there definitely is a cultural ethical problem, and it's related to the lack of cultural sustainability in fashion, or the lack of cultural sustainability in fashion is visible particularly in cases of cultural appropriation. But it's very difficult to do anything about cultural appropriation with IP law, and this is due to the history of the IP system, which is it has a colonialist history. So basically, the IP system reflects the global North's view on property and creativity, and it doesn't really take into account marginalized cultures, dress heritage, for instance, or other cultural creativity as something that is worth protecting. So that's why copyright law, for instance, design law, they don't really work well in cases where someone is accused of cultural appropriation. One reason is, for instance, that, well, let's take an example, dress heritage, some traditional dress, for instance. For a copyright lawsuit to succeed, it would require that this infringed work, this dress heritage, for instance, is fixed or identified with sufficient precision and objectivity to be precise. That's what the European Union Court of Justice uses in Levola-Hingelo copyright case. And if we think about dress heritage, it's not like all traditional dresses are exactly the same. They sort of reflect one idea, and then everyone who has made a traditional dress, they sort of express it in their own way. But we know that in the IP system, ideas cannot be protected. So unfortunately, the IP system has a sort of a fundamental conflict with the protecting of cultural creativity, dress heritage, for instance. If you're interested in reading more about this topic per se, I wrote about it in my doctoral thesis. If you Google my name and add doctoral dissertation, you will read more. You can read more my views about this.
I added the link on the Q&A box, Heidi.
Oh, thank you.
Heidi.
Good teamwork. Ladies and gentlemen, before closing this session, I would like to give the floor to the person who made this session possible by gathering us, Isabel Cantista from the Global Fashion Conference. So, Isabel, I think that you wanted also to intervene with us.
Yes, thank you so much. It's going to be a very quick remark. I would like to thank everybody from this panel. It was a wonderful panel, and we could all see that law is not something that is far away from the fashion world and from the fashion industry. So this is the positioning of the Global Fashion Conference, is to put together all the components of the sectoral innovation system. And I think that this panel has highlighted that it makes sense.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Thanks a lot to Dr. Rohleder. Thank you to the fabulous team on brand protection versus destruction. I will make use of your findings and also try to share it as widely as possible with my colleagues, so that we can advance also there together with the European Parliament and the Council. Big thanks to all, and I wish you a very good day and hope to be again in contact very soon. Thank you.